Sometime in late 1983 or early 1984, a rumor started to wind its way through some of the more obsessive subsects of Bob Dylan fans. Dylan had just released his 22nd studio album, Infidels, to a relatively solid reception. Few, if any, were calling Infidels a masterpiece, but the general consensus was that Dylan's return to secular music was a significant step up from the trilogy of evangelical gospel albums that preceded it. Some songs, like Joker Man, even showed shades of the cryptic, poetic Dylan that had reshaped American music 20 years earlier. But according to this rumor, there was a song cut from the album that was a step up even from that. A song that might even reach the rarefied air of Dylan's much mythologized Imperial period. A song that proved that Dylan's capacity for brilliant insight and virtuosic songcraft hadn't faded with age. And soon enough, these rumors would prove true. Infidels was barely out of the pressing plant when its first bootlegs started to leak into the underground. By this point, Dylan already had a well-developed community of bootleggers with multiple labels and sophisticated networks of distribution. It was actually a Dylan leak called Great White Wonder that kicked off the golden age of music bootlegging back in 1969. In those days, the modern pop industry was still being born, and its legal arm had yet to evolve into the many-headed profit monster that it is today. Labels had less legal and financial resources to chase down leakers and bootleggers, so the bootlegs themselves became objects of mainstream attention. When Great White Wonder hit the scene, independent radio DJs started spinning it at prime time, and the thriving rock press leapt to the story. A 1969 piece in Rolling Stone magazine described the clandestine practices of the bootleggers, borrowing cars to drive records around, and providing their clients with no address or contact point. Dylan's label, Columbia Records, chased after these bootleggers in vain, launching the first sorties in a war that would one day grow to engulf the entire industry. Eventually, many of the recordings that made up Great White Wonder would be officially released to great acclaim on the Basement tapes. All of this is to say, it's not really a surprise that Infidels outtakes found their way out into the world in the mid-80s. And as they did so, Dylan fans across the world became intimately familiar with an unreleased masterpiece called Blind Willie McTell. The creative process can be messy and complicated. Songs can mold themselves and change over time, and bootlegs are a weird representation of this, which gives them a sort of transient quality. Sometimes bootlegs will show songs that exist only in partial snippets or lo-fi demos. Sometimes they'll show songs in multiple forms over multiple takes, with no definitive version on an official release. And sometimes these bootlegs end up getting an official release that freezes a certain recording in people's minds as the proper one. Blind Willie McTell got its first official release, along with a treasure trove of other bootlegs, in 1991, when Columbia Records issued a box set called the Bootleg Series Volumes 1 to 3. This enormous release of bootlegs was the first in a series that's ongoing to this day, plundering Dylan's archives for outtakes, live performances, and unreleased songs. And while there's plenty of gems on those first 3 volumes, none stand out quite like Blind Willie McTell.
Seen the arrow on the doorpost.
The version included on the bootleg series is a sparse, open piece featuring only Dylan's vocals and piano and Mark Knopfler on a 12-string guitar. Dylan sings in a haunting dirge as the lyrics open on an ambiguous verse tinged with religious symbolism. This version of the song was recorded on the last day of the Infidels sessions. It's the most familiar version for many Dylan fans, myself included, but in recent years we've had 2 more official releases that give insight into the development of the song. These earlier takes were recorded on the first day of the Infidels session, so Dylan really did try to make the song work for almost an entire month before eventually cutting it from the album. Take 1, officially released in 2021 by Third Man Records, bears much more of a resemblance to the rest of Infidels. It features a full electrified band, including an airy organ, a thumping country bass line, and searing guitar interjections played by McTell. Dylan approaches the vocals in this take differently as well, singing with a sort of cynical sneer.
Well, I heard that hoot owl singing as they were taking
Take 5, released on the bootleg series Volume 16, seems like a midway point between the other two released versions. It's still got the full electric band, but the arrangement is sparse, with the piano put at the forefront. Dylan's vocals here seem to have a tinge of desperation to them, growing to a shout by the end of the song.
And I know no one can sing the blues like blind Willie McTell.
Even with these newer recordings out there, there's a real temptation to declare that take from the last day as the definitive, official version of the song. After all, it was recorded later than the other two and released before them, but that would be an oversimplification. Dylan's songs, like most songs really, are in a constant state of flux, changing over the years and taking on new characteristics with each recording and each live performance.
I've seen the arrow on the doorpost, saying this land is condemned.
The tendency to think of songs as singular, static objects is a product of the modern recording industry. For most of human history, songs have passed from musician to musician, changing with the times and culture, colliding into each other, and being remixed and remade year after year. Blind Willie McTell is a result of this exact process. While the lyrics are Dylan originals, the music is an interpretation of one of America's most beloved blues tunes, a tune sometimes known as Gambler's Blues, and sometimes known as St. James Infirmary Blues. So to properly understand Blind Willie McTell, we first need to understand St. James Infirmary Blues. In the long and storied history of American blues, there are few songs as enigmatic and beloved as St. James Infirmary Blues. Hundreds of artists have tried their hand at this song over the past century, dating back to the earliest days of the recording industry. Louis Armstrong growled it with his Savoy Ballroom 5 in 1928, and Coco the Clown sang it in Cab Calloway's voice in 1933. Dave Van Ronk performed it in Greenwich Village at the height of the folk revival, and the White Stripes made it a punk blues at the turn of the millennium. It's been performed by everyone from Oingo Boingo to Yo-Yo Ma to, believe it or not, Hugh Laurie. Despite this long history, the song's true origin remains a bit of a mystery. The recorded history of the song begins in 1924, when its melody appears on a song called Charleston Cabin, recorded by the California Ramblers. 3 years later, Fess Williams and his Royal Flush Orchestra recorded the earliest full version of the song under the title Gambler's Blues.
I passed by the infirmary and I saw my sweetheart there, and they had her stretched out on the table, poor child, so white, so pale, so fair.
That recording uses lyrics and much of the arrangement from the American Song Bag, a collection of folk tunes published by the poet Carl Sandburg. Sandburg presents two different versions of the lyrics. The first feature a sort of nested narrative, with the singer entering a bar and hearing a story from one of the patrons.
Well, it was down at old Joe's barroom, at the corner by the square. They were serving drinks as usual. The usual crowd was there. On my left stood Big Joe McKennedy. His eyes were bloodshot red. He turned to the crowd around him. These were the words he said.
This story begins as a lament for a lost loved one, but then jumps kind of abruptly to an elaborate imagination of the narrator's own funeral.
17 coal-black horses hitched to a rubber-tied hack. 7 girls going to the graveyard, 6 of them coming back.
The second version is more straightforward, without the nested opening scene. Both versions seem to tie the song back to a traditional English folk ballad called The Unfortunate Rake. That song dates back to at least 1790, and it's likely even older than that. Its lyrics see a singer coming upon an ailing, syphilis-stricken soldier outside of London's St. James Hospital.
As I was a-walking down by St. James's Hospital,
the soldier tells of the woman who gave him this infection and then lays out a series of funeral arrangements.
get 6 young soldiers to carry my coffin, 6 young girls to sing me a song, and each of them carry a bunch of green laurel, so they don't smell me as they bear me along.
In the centuries since it first rang out of the mouths of minstrels in the British Isles, The Unfortunate Rake has been reshaped to fit different times and different cultural traditions. It's been adapted into a nautical song in The Young Sailor Cut Down in His Prime, a cowboy song in The Streets of Laredo, and possibly a gambler's song in The Gambler's Blues. The folklorist Alan Lomax certainly drew a connection between The Unfortunate Rake and St. James Infirmary, and a 1960 compilation by Folkways traces the evolution of the song through its various versions, including Dave Van Ronk's Gambler's Blues. And as recently as 2008, Bob Dylan repeated this story on his SiriusXM radio show. But while the lyrical parallels are clear, the lineage might not be as clear as it looks. In his book, I Went Down to St. James Infirmary, Robert W. Harwood dives deep into the history of the song and finds no direct evidence tying St. James Infirmary to The Unfortunate Rake. As Harwood points out, while there are lyrical parallels, the two songs share no real musical lineage. In the 4th edition of the book, Harwood highlights a potential melodic connection not to an English folk song, but to a folk song performed by Roma people in the Nordics.
Tänk att jag en gång till dig har bejlat. Glöm mina felar men glöm aldrig mig.
It's hard to say for sure if this really is the origin of St. James Infirmary blues, but it could be a sign that this song was brought over to America as part of a wave of Norwegian immigration in the late 19th century. And there's other signs that throw into question the Unfortunate Rake connection as well. The earliest versions of the Unfortunate Rake taking place outside St. James Hospital would seem to be a surefire connection, except that earlier versions of Gambler's Blues don't actually mention St. James Infirmary. Some frame the song around Old Joe's Barroom and the Old Infirmary, while others call it St. Joe's Infirmary. So it's actually possible that St. James was a late addition to the song we now know as St. James Infirmary. And that's just the start. There's all sorts of quirks that separate St. James Infirmary and make it such an interesting song. You can see these quirks in Louis Armstrong's 1928 version, which strips the song down to its essential 3 verses. Taken together, these 3 verses don't actually really form much of a narrative at all. The first is the iconic lament that's become a staple of so many versions of the song, the striking, painful image of seeing your loved one dead in the hospital.
I went down to St. James Infirmary, saw my baby there.
Then comes the middle verse, which seems to be singing not about a dead love, but about a romantic partner who has left the singer.
She can look this wide world over, but she'll never find a sweet man like me. Bragging.
And finally, it concludes on a familiar verse, asking about funeral arrangements.
Put a $20 gold piece on my watch chain, so the boys will know that I died standing by
Harwood traces the strange middle verse to Harvard University Songs, a 1902 collection assembled by E.F. Dubois to paint a picture of the songs Harvard students of the day were singing. So it's quite possible that this verse comes from a completely different song that got amalgamated into St. James Infirmary sometime over the years. And that's not really a surprise. This is how folk music works. It's an oral tradition of passing tunes from musician to musician, with the songs themselves melding and changing in the process. Sometimes it's a misheard lyric, or a lyric changed for a new cultural audience. Sometimes verses are dropped, sometimes verses are added. Sometimes one tune finds its way into another. The result is that some folk songs become nearly impossible to pin down. They're not a single musical object, but rather an amorphous idea shared collectively by anyone who wishes to sing them. This process in reality is something that Bob Dylan understands well. From the earliest days of his career, Dylan would participate in this tradition, incorporating folk melodies and lyrical motifs into new pieces that spoke to his moment. In doing so, he was adding new chapters to the history of much celebrated folk songs. Dylan studied and admired the blues singers of old who had interpreted folk songs into their own canon, a canon that forms the basis of American musical history. This ethos of lifting songs, reworking tunes, reimagining lyrics is summed up well in a quote by a celebrated bluesman who participated eagerly in the tradition. I jump him from other writers, but I arrange him in my own way. The man who said that quote was a singer and 12-string guitarist who performed under various aliases over the years, but is best known as Blind Willie McTell. The life of Blind Willie McTell looks a lot like the life of so many bluesmen from his era. He was born in Georgia around the turn of the century and showed musical talent from a young age. He started on harmonica and accordion and then took up the guitar, an instrument that both his parents played. His father was a drinker and a gambler who left at a young age, and his mother died sometime in the 1920s. Left to fend for himself, McTell took up the nomadic life of the wandering bluesman.
My mom, daddy left me reckless, my daddy left me wild, wild, wild.
He honed his craft on a 12-string guitar, developing a talent for complex fingerpicking that let him color his music with intricate flourishes.
No, I'm not.
At first, he would make his money playing carnivals and street corners, but in 1927, he kicked off his recording career by cutting 8 songs for Victor Records. These recordings were made at the tail end of a blues craze that had fueled the young recording industry. After the surprise success of Mamie Smith's Crazy Blues in 1920, record executives across America rushed to find and record as many blues singers as they could. This craze showed the magic of black blues to white audiences and birthed a handful of superstars, including the Empress of the Blues, Bessie Smith. In 1926, Blind Lemon Jefferson scored a massive hit that had executives specifically looking for blind bluesmen. But the successes of Smith and Jefferson were the exception, not the rule. The vast majority of musicians recorded during this era were paid a pittance for their recordings, earned no royalties, wallowed in obscurity, or died young and poor. Blind Willie McTell's career followed the latter path much closer than the former. Though he cut more than 120 songs over a 3-decade recording career, none sold particularly well, and McTell never lived to see the influence he'd have on music. He died of a stroke in 1959, just as a new wave of blues appreciation was stirring in Greenwich Village, a wave that would see a young Bob Dylan rise to take America by storm. Dylan has sung Blind Willie McTell's praises over the years and recorded a number of his songs, including Broke Down Engine Blues.
Feel like a broke down engine, ain't got no driving wheel.
It's tempting to see the song Blind Willie McTell as simply an extension of Dylan's admiration for an underappreciated bluesman. The chorus certainly sings McTell's praises.
And I know no one can sing the blues like Blind Willie McTell.
But things are seldom so simple with Bob Dylan. The rest of the lyrics have basically nothing to do with McTell at all, at least not on a surface level. Even the lyric that does mention McTell seems a little strange, as McTell was most renowned for his guitar playing, not his singing. But there's connections if we peek under the surface. Several times throughout his career, Blind Willie McTell recorded a song called Dying Crapshooter Blues. That song opens on the tale of Little Jesse, a crooked gambler who gets left by his love and then shot by the police.
Little Jesse was a gambler, night and day. He used crooked cards and dice. Sinful guy, good-hearted, but had no soul. Heart was hard and cold like ice.
As he's ailing on his deathbed, he gathers his gang of crapshooters and lays out funeral wishes.
8 crapshooter to be my pallbearers. Let 'em be veiled down in black. I want 9 men going to the graveyard, Bubba, and 8 men coming back.
So Dying Crapshooter Blues ties Blind Willie McTell back to St. James Infirmary Blues, the song that forms the melodic and emotional basis for Bob Dylan's Blind Willie McTell. This is no coincidence. It's Dylan pulling a series of evocative images and archetypal figures together to create a singular song that tells the tragic and triumphant story of blues music and explores the ghosts of the land that birthed it. From its opening moments, Blind Willie McTell is laden with imagery and symbols from 2 separate but related cultural traditions, the Bible and the blues. These 2 worlds overlay and interlace in Dylan's lyrics, framing the American South as the battlegrounds for a divine struggle over the human soul. The song opens with imagery that calls to mind the 10 plagues of Egypt.
Seen the arrow on the doorpost, saying this land is condemned. All the way from New Orleans to Jerusalem.
It's not a direct allusion to the Bible, but rather a glancing blow, something that conjures archetypal images in the mind, but may also point to a more immediate history of America. New Orleans here serves as the role of the holy city of the blues. It's a fitting image. New Orleans is where so much of American music first took root before spreading down the Mississippi and eventually across the world. And it's a city with musical ties to Dylan's song as well. It's uncertain where St. James Infirmary Blues was actually born, but New Orleans is one of the most likely culprits, with its rich tradition of jazz funeral marches. It's the hometown of Louis Armstrong, who recorded what might be the most iconic take on the song. New Orleans' importance in the history and culture of blues, jazz, and really all of American music is here compared to Jerusalem's place at the center of the Abrahamic religions. But there's another potential reading of Jerusalem as well. America is dotted with towns called Jerusalem, a reflection of a country founded by Christian pilgrims who imagined they could build anew their own holy land. One such Jerusalem, now called Cortland, sits 250 miles south of the Mason-Dixon line. This Jerusalem was the set piece for a key moment in America's torturous history, the slave rebellion of Nat Turner. It's hard to say whether Dylan was intentionally trying to conjure this Jerusalem in his songwriting, but all of his lyrics are laden with such ghosts of slavery. Within this context, the condemned land is the American South. But in most live performances, Dylan actually tweaks this lyric, giving yet another level to its depths.
All the way from New Orleans to New Jerusalem.
In the Book of Revelation, New Jerusalem is portrayed as a divine city to be gifted from the heavens, paradise made manifest on earth. Here it's important to remember that Dylan had converted to Christianity 4 or 5 years before this song was written, and was just coming off a trilogy of evangelical gospel albums. A lot of people will view Dylan's Christian period as a sort of strange mid-career blip, but it is the genuine reflection of someone who really believed what he sang. And he didn't give up those beliefs when he turned back to secular music, at least not immediately. In 1983, Dylan told the Los Angeles Times about his thoughts on his gospel era, saying, "I don't particularly regret telling people how to get their souls saved." It seems to me that Blind Willie McTell is a song exploring the complex question as to whether America's soul can be saved, or if the scars of slavery mean that the country is cursed to eternal damnation. Dylan himself is not saying the land is condemned in this first stanza. He's staring at someone else's declaration of the condemned land. Throughout the song, Dylan will play the part of the observer, passing through the South and bearing witness.
I travel through East Texas, where many martyrs fell.
East Texas is another land with a bleak history. Its warm climate and fertile soil made it a perfect home for thousands of cotton plantations, which laid the groundwork for a system of racism that would persist for generations even after slavery was abolished. East Texas was the home of many lynchings, and in 1910 it was the site of the Slocum Massacre, which killed as many as 100 Black Americans. Dylan's image of martyrs falling once again pairs the history of American violence with religious symbolism. And then the song pivots sharply to the couplet that will end each verse.
And I know no one can sing the blues like Blind Willie McTell.
With the scene set on Dylan's biblical visions of the South, he hones in on the song's metaphors in the second verse. We are met once again with the dual vision laden with religious significance.
Well, I heard that hoot owl singing as they were taking down the tents. The stars above the barren trees was his only audience.
The image of tents being taken down calls to mind visions of the Israelites wandering the desert, but also of the traveling vaudeville shows that gave birth to the early blues industry. Giants like Mamie Smith, Ma Rainey, and Bessie Smith all cut their teeth on this circuit, which served as one of the main sources of American musical entertainment in the days before the record boom. And while it helped to empower some performers, the vaudeville industry was just as exploitive as the recording industry that would one day replace it. In the second half of the verse, Dylan compares McTell's blues to these vaudeville shows.
Them charcoal gypsy maidens can strut their feathers well, but nobody can sing the blues like Blind Willie McTell.
Here, the refrain doesn't feel out of place. It's clearly placing Blind Willie McTell in direct comparison with a bawdy industry full of racist roots and a history of financial exploitation. McTell is personified in this verse as the hoot owl singing, standing apart from the tents and singing to the world even when he has no audience. It's a romanticized vision of a bluesman who sings not for any praise or success, but because he feels the blues. When put in a religious context, the image of Blind Willie McTell evokes the image of the blind mystic. Dylan is presenting McTell as a sort of prophet of the blues, more archetype than man. He's a symbol, a stand-in for the hundreds of bluesmen who formed the genre not out of hunger for glory or fame, but out of a raw and beautiful expression of pain with a depth that few can really understand.
I got to cross that.
Here, Blind Willie McTell might be representing the supposedly authentic, pure blues singer. This romanticized image adds a bit of irony to the lyrics because Blind Willie McTell is not some pure vision of blues authenticity. He was someone who tried to make a living in the music industry. In pursuit of that, McTell often recorded under different names so that different labels could publish him. He told tall tales about the songs that he played, and even claimed ownership over pieces he didn't write. In one recording session, McTell prefaces his take on Dying Crapshooter's blues with a story that suggests he wrote it based on a real man he knew.
Williams, his name was Jesse Williams. See, he got shot here on Coleman Street. And after he getting shot, I taken him home. He was sick about 3 weeks after I taken him home, sick from the shot. And so he gave me this request. And then wanted me to play this over his grave. That I did.
But in I Went Down to St. James Infirmary, Robert W. Harwood traces a version of the song back to an obscure pianist and arranger named Porter Granger, who recorded it 2 years before McTell ever claimed to have written it. So McTell was definitely exaggerating in his story, leaning into an imagined authenticity to play up his own character. This kind of theater is exactly what Dylan made his career doing. He spent his early days weaving tall tales about his past, including a claim that he grew up with a traveling circus. For Dylan, this kind of self-mythologizing is part of the blues tradition, a false authenticity that adds intrigue to your character and draws people in. It's the same kind of mythologizing Tommy Johnson partook in when he claimed to have made his famous Faustian bargain. And it's a mythologizing made by those who document the blues as well. John Lomax, a folklorist responsible for some of the most seminal recordings in history, including a session with blind Willie McTell, had his own habit of playing up imagined authenticity. While his recordings and those of his son formed the basis of so much of our understanding of blues history, they were also tainted by a romanticized idea of the blues that Lomax had. Lomax imagined a primitive blues, preserved like a bug in amber, and often approached his recordings with this bias in mind. The issues underlying this vision famously rear their head in the legend of Lomax dressing up Leadbelly in prison stripes or overalls for publicity and film, despite the fact that Leadbelly himself was a sharp dresser who usually performed with suits and fine hats. Lomax was a key figure in preserving and championing the blues, but he did so by pandering to spectacle, presenting an idealized version of the blues man for a white gaze. And that's a trend that didn't stop with Lomax. Plenty of white musicians over the years adopted fake personas or vocal affectations that hint toward black cultural traditions, hoping to give their songs an air of authenticity. Dylan himself isn't innocent of this. He's a Jewish man born and raised in Minnesota, but much of his early career was spent trying to imitate his vision of an archetypal bluesman.
Well, there's one kind of favor I'll ask you.
Blind Willie McTell sees Dylan acknowledging and interrogating this aspect of himself. But I think he's shedding the mask a little here. He's placing himself not within the scenes of pain and suffering that ultimately helped bring the blues about, but rather as an outside observer and documentarian, reminding America of its past sins and posing questions for the future. The third verse of Blind Willie McTell is dark and visceral, driving home the harshest realities of American history. Note Dylan's use of sensory inputs here, bringing the haunting scenes to life by inviting you to hear, smell, and see the torments of the past.
See them big plantations burning. Hear the cracking of the whip. Smell that sweet magnolia blooming. See the ghost of slavery's ship.
These lines explore not only the violence and pain of slavery, but its violent end in the Civil War. The sight of plantations burning is likely a reference to Sherman's March to the Sea, a scorched earth campaign in the late stages of the American Civil War. General Sherman and his troops marched from Atlanta to Savannah, leaving ash in their wake as they torched the Confederates' military and civilian infrastructure. The scars that this campaign left on the South are real and lasting. But Dylan isn't apologizing for the Confederacy by acknowledging the pain that Southerners feel. The burning of the plantations is immediately followed up by one of the most striking symbols of the violence of slavery, the cracking of the whip. Then comes a sharp juxtaposition, the smell of magnolia blooming. The magnolia is the state flower of both Mississippi and Louisiana, a beautiful symbol that's become a key icon in visions of the antebellum South. Not only does this delicate image throw the heavy violence into sharp relief, it also connects the song to one of the most important pieces in American music history. In 1939, Billie Holiday first recorded Strange Fruit, an anti-lynching protest song written by the Jewish writer Abel Meeropol.
Southern trees bear strange fruit.
Strange Fruit uses the scent of magnolia in the exact same way as Dylan, juxtaposing its romantic connotations with the brutality of Southern racism.
Scent of magnolia, sweet and fresh. Then the sudden smell of burning flesh.
It's a song that's sometimes credited with kicking off the civil rights movement, a movement that would come to its zenith in the early days of Dylan's career. By invoking Strange Fruit, Dylan is validating his own place in this conversation as a Jewish songwriter witnessing the Black American experience from the outside. And while Dylan obviously can't speak intimately to the Black experience, he did play his own part in the civil rights movement. His song Blowin' in the Wind was a civil rights anthem and a song that inspired Sam Cooke to write A Change Is Gonna Come. And in August 1963, when Martin Luther King Jr. marched on Washington and delivered his I Have a Dream speech, a 22-year-old Dylan was right there, performing 4 songs at the protest. The defining image of this third verse might be the ghost of slavery ships, a specter of history that looms not just over the South, but over the entirety of America, and over the blues itself. Blues is a music that evolved because of slavery. It combined West African folk music with Caribbean and European influences that developed as a result of the triangular trade. It grew out of the deep human need for catharsis and joy, developed by a people who endured many of history's greatest injustices. It grew in a post-war Jim Crow South racked with racism and economic hardship. Musically, it's built on field hollers and work songs, a legacy that's present not just in the blues, but in the myriad musics that grew out of it. Almost the entirety of American popular music is tied to this tradition one way or another. And it's a reality that's not talked about nearly enough because it's complicated and painful. I view Blind Willie McTell as Dylan's attempts at reconciling the dissonance that happens when such a powerful and important force is born out of such a vivid hatred and cruelty. It's him trying to understand his place within this world, and America's place within its own history. These musings fold into the song's Christian themes when it comes to questions of salvation, redemption, and damnation. It's always seemed to me that Blind Willie McTell is questioning if America can ever be redeemed for its historical sins. Dylan doesn't offer a clear answer to this question, but he offers a potential path toward redemption: the blues itself. The spiritual imagery comes back at the end of the third verse.
I can hear them tribes moaning, hear that undertaker's bell.
The tribes moaning could be the tribes of Israel, or the African tribes split up and devastated by slavery. They could also represent another stain on America's history that plays into this whole story: the displacement and genocide of America's indigenous peoples. The parallel between American slaves and the enslaved tribes of Israel is one that's been drawn many times before. It's one of the reasons why Christianity resonated so much with the Black diaspora, and one of the reasons why Christianity has helped to fuel so many movements of Black resistance, including the Civil Rights Movement. Many blues singers have walked the line between blues and gospel over the years, including Blind Willie McTell himself.
I have changed my life for Jesus.
Dylan brings this verse home with an image that pulls all of the morbidity of the song together with its musical origins. The Undertaker's bell is a clear symbol of death, and a symbol that reminds us that this entire song is built on a funeral march blues. Taken as a whole, this verse has some of the clearest imagery of the entire song, which is interesting because Dylan has taken to omitting it in more contemporary versions of Blind Willie McTell. The official lyrics on his website don't include this verse, and since at least the early 2000s, he's performed the song without it. This could be because the dark imagery clashes with the swaggering, sneering arrangement he favors today. It could be because he's deemed the imagery he uses too visceral, too shocking. Or it could just be because the verse removes some of the song's ambiguities, and Dylan's always had a bias toward that which is cryptic and obscure. That bias will rear its head in the penultimate verse of the song, which leaves much up to interpretation. After spending most of the song hovering through broad scenes detached from time, vivid landscape depictions of the South in all of its beauty and terror, Dylan pulls inward toward the end, focusing on two enigmatic figures.
There's a woman by the river with some fine young handsome man. He's dressed up like a squire, bootleg whiskey in his hand.
This is one of the most obscure images of the entire song, but I personally see the verse as an exploration of white Southerners and their part in all of this history. The fine young handsome man carrying a jug of bootlegged whiskey has a sinister edge to it and suggests that no matter how well the South might dress itself up, its history will always be close at hand. Dylan jumps from the image of this couple to a chain gang, a relic of the Jim Crow South that proves that racist institutions and traditions long outlived slavery.
There's a chain gang on the highway. I can hear them rebels yell.
The presumably black chain gang is compared to the Rebel Yell, one of the most iconic images of the Civil War. The Rebel Yell is the defiant shout of those about to give their lives to fight for their land and for their ability to oppress others. The comparison of the Rebel Yell to Blind Willie McTell is particularly interesting. Both the yell and the blues holler are reflections of defiance in their own way. Dylan isn't saying here that the South was justified, but he's acknowledging that many of the people who fought in the Civil War were, from their perspective, defending their land and their way of life against an oppressive outside. The current version on Dylan's website changes this couplet, making it even clearer that this is about the human side of the Civil War. Dylan sings, "Some of them died in battle, some of them survived as well." It's a straightforward and realist depiction, a reminder that these historical atrocities were not committed by abstract concepts of evil and villainy, but by real, living, and breathing humans. And that reality is driven home in the final, stirring verse of the song. As Blind Willie McTell reaches its climax, Dylan makes clear the divine stakes and the eternal struggle at the heart of everything he's sung about so far.
Where God is in his heaven, and we all want what's his, but power and greed and corruptible seed seem to be all that there is.
This isn't a direct call to action, but rather a bleak and realist observation about the nature of humanity. It's an acknowledgement of a seemingly inevitable truth. Humans are always going to find ways to hurt and oppress each other. We will always be tempted by power, and if history is any indication, many of us will succumb to this temptation. This struggle against the temptation to do evil is at the heart of the Christian theology that Dylan evokes throughout this song. It's a struggle that America as a country has failed time and time again, succumbing to the allures of oppression, violence, and imperialism. And it's why there are some who say the entire land is condemned. Dylan doesn't end on this hopeless and cynical perspective of mankind. With a rousing vocal performance, he brings the lyrics back to the thread that has tied the whole song together.
I'm gazing out the window of the St. James Hotel, and I know no one can sing the blues like Blind Willie McTell.
Blind Willie McTell and the blues that he represents are the hope for America's salvation. The hope that something good and something meaningful can come out of suffering and cruelty that defies any reason and throws into question any ideas of a just and righteous world. Dylan understands the power of the blues as well as anyone. He is a man shaped by the blues, a man whose life was given meaning by this music, and a man who has spent his career trying to do right by the persecuted communities that invented it. His relationship to this music is wrapped up in the metaphor of the St. James Hotel. There is a real hotel in New Orleans called the St. James Hotel, but I don't think that's what Dylan's talking about here. I see the St. James Hotel as a stand-in for the blues tradition that Dylan is a part of. It's a lyrical tie to Blind Willie McTell's musical underpinnings. St. James Infirmary is a patchwork song that has morphed throughout the ages, pulling bits and pieces from across the varied cultures that make up the colorful tapestry of America. It's an expression of grief and a parable against sin. It's a dark memento mori, but also a playful celebration.
I went down to St. James Infirmary. I saw my baby lying there.
It's a song that embodies the many complexities and contradictions of the blues tradition itself. And so it forms the foundations of the building that Dylan sits in, gazing out on the haunted landscape of America and passing his own judgment. For Dylan, this building is a hotel, which makes him a tourist. He's not born of the blues. He doesn't have the authenticity of the real black blues singers, if indeed that sort of authenticity can tangibly exist at all. But he's happy to give it his shot nonetheless, to be a patron of this hotel and celebrate the blues for what it means to him and to his country. And he pays for his stay at the St. James Hotel by serving as a historian and bearing witness, by reminding people of all that came before and memorializing the greats that shaped him and that shaped all of American music, even if he knows that he'll never truly be able to sing the blues like Blind Willie McTell. So if Blind Willie McTell is such a masterpiece, such an important song speaking to real issues, why did it go unreleased for so long? Well, that's something that only Bob Dylan can say for sure. He's been asked the question many times over the years and given effusive answers, saying he can't remember why he chose to leave it off, that the song wasn't recorded right, or that it was just an unfinished demo. It's hard to condone people stealing and leaking music against an artist's wishes, but I think this is a case where the world might be better off for the actions of bootleggers, because Blind Willie McTell is a singular and truly important song, quite unlike anything else in Dylan's career. And for his part, Dylan seems to have come round on it. After the band covered it on their 1993 album Jericho, Dylan has started incorporating it into his live set list. Since then, he's performed it live more than 200 times, and as we've seen, continued to tweak the lyrics and arrangement. The word masterpiece is thrown around a lot, especially when it comes to Dylan, but I think Blind Willie McTell is as deserving of the title as any song in his catalog. It's not a piece with the youthful defiance or psychedelic spark of his imperial heyday. Rather, it's a piece born from wisdom and reflection. A piece that could only be created by a man well into his life, who knew both triumph and pain, and who had the willingness to reflect on all that came before him. It's a living document of the richness and complexities of the American blues tradition, and an urgent reminder of the history behind it. And above all, it's a quintessentially human piece, examining the troubles and questions that have followed us as a species as long as we've been around. Though it's religious in nature, it's not a song that sees Dylan preach. When all is said and done, he gives no clear answer as to whether the blues can truly redeem the sins of the past. He leaves that final judgment in the hands of his listeners, in the hands of us. To me, Bob Dylan is the most interesting man in music history. I could talk about the nuances of his character and music for days, and clearly I'm not the only one. He's drawn enough attention over the years to have not one, but 2 different biopics exploring his story and influence. Naturally, I've got thoughts on both of these films. Thoughts that I explore in my next video, What's the Point of Music Biopics? Beyond I'm Not There and A Complete Unknown, that video sees me dive into all sorts of biopics, from Bohemian Rhapsody to Rocket Man to 24 Hour Party People, And yes, I do talk about the Robbie Williams Chimp movie. If that video sounds like something you want to watch, well, I've got good news. You can check it out on Nebula right now. And that's not just a one-off. For the foreseeable future, all of my regular Polyphonic videos will be released a full month ahead on Nebula. Nebula is the prestige streaming platform created and owned by creators like myself. It's got an incredible library of originals, from full-length documentaries to new comedy series and fiction originals to my own experimental series, Polyphonic Magazine. You can get access to all of these, as well as early, ad-free videos by myself and other great creators for the price of a cup of coffee every month. If you go to go.nebula.tv/polyphonic, you can get 40% off an annual premium subscription, which means just $3 per month or $36 for a full year. So head on over to go.nebula.tv/polyphonic and watch my video on biopics now. And once you're done with that, you can check out the new original, Abolish Everything, which sees comedians roasting pet peeves that they want removed from society. It's a super fun watch, and it's only available on Nebula. So again, if you go to the link in the description, you can get the best deal possible, you can watch my stuff early, and you can really help support my channel. And hey, thanks for watching.